Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving headfirst into the world of data, or more specifically, how our digital breadcrumbs paint a fascinating and sometimes unsettling picture of who we really are.
Yeah, it's like holding a mirror up to ourselves, right? But this mirror reflects back all those hidden biases and unconscious preferences, the things we might not even admit to ourselves.
Exactly. And to guide us through this hall of digital reflections, we've got Christian Rudder's Dataclysm. Talk about an eye-opening read. He digs into data from all sorts of online platforms, but his findings from OkCupid, the dating site, are especially revealing.
Oh, absolutely. See, dating is where those hidden biases really come to the forefront. And what's so fascinating about Rudder's work is that he's capturing behavior in a context where people think their actions are private. It's like they're letting their guard down, revealing preferences they might not even acknowledge in their everyday lives.
Okay, so let's get specific. What kind of stuff did Rudder uncover? What surprised you the most?
Well, one of the most startling findings, and this really gets at those unconscious biases we were talking about, relates to attractiveness and job applications. Rudder analyzed data from a job search platform and found that a woman's perceived attractiveness played a significant role in whether she landed an interview or not, even with female hiring managers.
Wait, seriously, just based on looks, that's messed up.
Right. And get this. A man's attractiveness had virtually zero impact on his chances of getting an interview.
Whoa, it's like those algorithms are perpetuating those same old double standards we see in the offline world.
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is that this pattern, the one where attractiveness matters more for women, held consistent across multiple dating platforms as well, like OkCupid and Match.com. And here's the kicker. This was regardless of the user's demographics or their location.
So this isn't just a fluke or a one-off thing, it's a trend. Okay, wow. What about race? Did Rudder's data reveal anything about racial preferences in dating?
It did, and it challenges some long-held assumptions. For instance, men from various racial backgrounds consistently rated women who identified as Asian or white as more attractive compared to other races.
And this pattern was consistent across different platforms.
Yep. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember the one-drop rule?
Refresh my memory.
So historically, even the slightest trace of African ancestry could lead to someone being categorized as black, right? But Rudder's findings suggest almost a reverse one-drop rule when it comes to attractiveness ratings on these dating platforms.
A reverse one-drop rule. Now, that's something I've never heard before. So what does that look like in the data?
Basically, users who identified as multiracial, specifically white, and another race, consistently received higher attractiveness ratings compared to users who solely identified as that other race.
So you're saying that, according to this data, having a mix of racial features is seen as more attractive. I mean, what does that say about how our ideas about race are evolving or not evolving as a society?
It definitely makes you think, right? It challenges those traditional rigid categories and maybe even hints at a preference for diversity, at least in this online dating context.
Wow, it's like those deeply ingrained preferences are bubbling up to the surface, even when people think they're making choices based solely on, love or whatever. Okay, so we've talked about looks and race. What about language? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with this idea that online communication is making our language shorter, less formal. Did Rudder find any evidence of that?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
It's easy to buy into that narrative that the internet is destroying language, but like most things, the reality is far more nuanced.
Okay, good. Because I gotta say, I kind of love the creativity of internet slang. But seriously, what did Rudder find when it came to how we're using language online?
Get this. He analyzed Twitter data and found that the average word length on Twitter is actually longer than in more formal writing.
Wait, seriously? Longer? I would guess the complete opposite.
Right. Goes against everything we think we know about online communication. But it's not just about word length. The words themselves reveal some fascinating shifts in how we think about time, for example.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
Well, Rudder found that there's this growing societal focus on the present. Like mentions of specific years, they've changed drastically, with more recent years just dominating the conversation.
So it's like we're all about the now, right? But is that just a Twitter thing? What about other forms of online writing?
That's the thing. It's not just Twitter. Rudder actually looked at data from Google Books and found the exact same pattern. Mentions of recent years completely overshadow mentions of the past, even when you account for the fact that we're publishing way more books today than ever before.
Wow, so it's like our collective rearview mirror is shrinking, like the past is fading faster than ever. It's kind of a mind-blowing concept when you think about it.
It really is. And it ties into this whole idea of imagined communities.
Yeah.
You know, how people form these shared identities, even if they're spread out across the globe.
Right. Like Benedict Anderson talked about with newspapers and novels, how they created this sense of shared experience. But now with the internet, it's happening on a whole other level, right? I mean, we see these imagined communities popping up around everything from like obscure hobbies to major global events.
Absolutely. And what's so amazing is that now, thanks to digital data, we can actually track these communities as they evolve in real time. We can see how ideas spread, how people come together around shared passions, and how all of these online interactions ultimately influence our sense of self. It's like we're mapping the human experience in a whole new way.
It's like we're not just building online communities, we're building these whole new maps of ourselves, our interests, our connections. It makes you wonder, are these digital maps even more revealing than any physical map could ever be?
That's a great question. And speaking of maps, Rudder digs into some really fascinating examples of digital mapping, like how our online activities reveal these geographic patterns in our behavior, even our beliefs.
Oh, right. Like those maps based on Craigslist's misconnections section. Talk about a digital map of heartbreak. But I'm guessing those maps are just scratching the surface.
Totally. Researchers are using data in real time to map not just locations, but like emotions, social phenomena. There's this project, the Dolly Project. They actually map geotagged tweets to track how emotions cluster geographically, like after events like earthquakes. It's amazing how data can capture those ripples of shared experience, even online.
Wow, so we're talking about like a whole new level of emotional mapping. It's like physical proximity doesn't even matter anymore when it comes to sharing these experiences. But what about the flip side? What about those parts of ourselves that we keep hidden, the stuff we don't necessarily broadcast to the world? Can digital mapping reveal those things too?
Oh, absolutely. Remember that map of gay porn downloads? It actually painted a much more geographically diverse picture of sexuality than all the traditional self-reported data out there.
That's right. It's a powerful reminder that what people say and what they do online, it's not always the same, especially when it comes to sensitive topics. It really highlights the limitations of those traditional surveys and all that self-reporting, right?
Absolutely. Digital data, it often captures a more unguarded, more authentic side of ourselves. It lets us see beyond the personas we present to the world.
So it's like these digital maps are like these x-rays of our imagined communities, right?
Yeah.
They show us how we connect and identify with each other in ways that go beyond physical boundaries. It's like we're witnessing the birth of new social structures, all happening in this digital space.
Precisely. And maybe there's no better example of this than Reddit. I mean, it's this fascinating case study in how anonymity can actually foster a really powerful sense of
But
community.
totally, Reddit is like its own universe, right? With
Mhm.
communities for literally every interest imaginable. And it's amazing how, even with that anonymity, users are forming these genuine bonds. They're even coordinating real life meetups and everything.
It speaks to our very human need for connection, for belonging, doesn't it? It shows how the internet allows those connections to flourish, even without all those traditional social cues.
So even without knowing who's behind the screen, people are forming these really deep bonds in places like Reddit. It makes you wonder if, in some ways, these online communities tap into something even more profound than our offline relationships.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? And it raises some big questions about how all of this data, how our online lives are shaping our very sense of self.
Yeah, and it's not just about like belonging to a group, right? It's like we're creating these digital versions of ourselves, almost like a new way of understanding who we are. It's exciting, but also kind of creepy, don't you think?
For sure, it blurs the lines, right? Where does the online self end and the offline self begin? And all this data we're generating, it's leading us into this whole quantified self era. It's not just about passively leaving those digital traces anymore. It's like we're actively tracking and analyzing them to, figure ourselves out.
Totally. I mean, think about it. Fitness trackers, those sleep apps, even our gaming consoles are gathering data on our habits, our preferences. It's like we're building these crazy detailed data portraits of ourselves.
Right. And that data, it's got this incredible potential, right? I think personalized recommendations, self-improvement, even medical advancements. But it also comes with some serious ethical baggage.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. All this data floating around, who has access to it and what are they doing with it? That's what I want to know.
Right. It's the million-dollar question for sure. I mean, On the one hand, we're already seeing data analysis being used for some pretty amazing things, like tracking disease outbreaks as they happen.
Like Google Flu, right? I read about that. They use search data to pinpoint flu outbreaks even before traditional methods caught on.
Exactly. And some researchers are even using data to try and identify potential side effects of medications, things that maybe didn't show up in those initial clinical trials. So the potential for good is huge, no doubt.
Okay, but there's got to be a flip side. We hear about all these data breaches, privacy violations. It's enough to make you paranoid.
Oh, absolutely. It's a valid concern. We can't just throw caution to the wind. I mean, advocating for responsible data practices, that's got to be a top priority. It's about finding that balance, right, between all this amazing innovation and protecting individual privacy.
Yeah, easier said than done, though, right? Feels like walking a tightrope sometimes.
Totally. Look, as we keep moving deeper into this data-driven world, staying informed, being part of these conversations, it's more crucial than ever, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Data can be a powerful tool, but it's up to us to make sure it's used responsibly. It's on all of us. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. As our digital lives and our real lives become even more intertwined, what's it even mean to be human in this age of data? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.